Is there a particular super green supplement that you recommend?
I've been playing around. The most recent one I've used is Scoop, and it's kind of like an all-in-one. It's also got some herbs. So as far as like an immune booster too, especially when you're on the trail, you're experiencing, a lot of stress to the body. I find, boosting the immune system. And then of course, people are sick on the trail. I mean, there's constantly, even though you're like in the woods, the wilderness,
Right.
the Appalachian Trail is a unique situation where you're in contact with people a lot.
Yes.
And everybody wants to shake hands,
especially
and
you,
high five, which is great.
Yeah.
Luckily, I only had one bout of stomach/flu, and at one point I thought, "Gosh, is it something like Lyme's?" Because I had so many ticks on me, and
Right.
Jenny picked over like a dozen off of me throughout Virginia and Pennsylvania, and I was worried that was early symptoms of Lyme's already because it was a few weeks prior, and so and it was just really, I think, a bug because I had one day where things were off and a little feverish, and it kind of dissipated over a couple of days, but that was it. So despite all the stress, all the sleep deprivation, all the load on my body, I was still able to bounce back from things like that.
Yeah. So I know you've heard this criticism before, but some in the hiking community have said that you, or really any FKT attempt, is missing the point, that you were moving too fast to enjoy the hike, and that you really didn't get to take in any of your surroundings. What do you have to say to these criticisms?
Oh, I would say you should join me for a while because I wasn't blazing the trail. In fact, ask some of the thru-hikers that joined me for, sometimes they would be running with me for 5 to 8 miles. I had one gentleman join me for 18 miles, in fact. And then I had times where I was hiking uphill, and I was hiking along with some other thru-hikers from time to time, and I would just share stories. And so I was still able to have this social connection, which I think a lot of thru-hikers assume FKT folks are just blazing.
Mm-hmm.
I also went northbound, so I had more opportunity where I was going the same direction as a majority of the hikers. And then, seeing the sounds too, I was moving a lot of miles per day, but if you look at my average pace, it wasn't a whole lot different or a whole lot faster than, say, somebody who's through hiking at a strong pace.
Sure.
So my average pace a lot of days was 3.5 miles an hour. Of course, a lot of times slower, especially up north. And I just spent more time on the trail. So I guess for some people, I experienced the trail early mornings and late at night into the wee hours of the morning, sometimes 24/7. And so I think I experienced the trail in a lot of ways that maybe some thru-hikers don't. Because there were times where I wished I was in the tent or like in a warm spot, and I was still having to put in another 20 miles that day.
Right.
Sometimes at 8 p.m. it was like, okay, I've got another 15 more miles, and I would hike in and I would hear the owls and get the spider webs that were already being formed that night, and then early morning I'd get all the spider webs. So I was experiencing the trail, seeing the red Fs scamper across the trail and be able to pick them up. A lot of people assume that when you're running or setting an FKT, you're blazing, but the whole thing is all about efficiency. So you have to be efficient, and I think the whole reason we do these things, whether we're FKT folks or we're day hikers or we're thru-hikers that are hiking the trail, there's really no speed limit. We're out there on foot experiencing the trail. We're on our own journey. Definitely I was maybe in more discomfort and pain than some people, but it didn't take away from the senses being attuned to my surroundings.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember the sights and the smells. In fact, sometimes I think because I was working like so hard a lot of times and pushing myself out in that edge, my vision and my sense of sound and smells might have been even more attuned because that's all that I had left, really. I didn't have after a while, it was like I couldn't think anything more than like putting one foot in front of the other and getting down the trail. And it was just really working off of those survival instincts and just kind of tapping into that, which I think is a special thing. So I feel like I enjoyed the trail, and it is hard when people think, oh, you're rushing all the time, but I was just out there longer. Some days 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day, 16 hours a day. And then, of course, towards the end, it was round the clock.
Yeah.
Almost.
So actually, I have a question here. So I guess this might be redundant, so feel free to skip it. But what was your sleep schedule like on let's say, a normal day?
Normal day, I was trying to get 6 hours. I mean, ideally, early on, I was thinking, I'll get 7 hours or so. hopefully 8, but it just wasn't happening. I found myself, and again, Jenny and I were learning all about this, getting into a rhythm, and it was really hard to figure out, managing all the things that we had to manage. And I wanted to take it a little bit easier too. I didn't want to have this feeling of like it's a race and I'm rushing all the time. But then I found out from, Carl Meltzer and Dave Horton and some veterans on the trail were like, no, you've got to like think of every minute, every second counts. And for me, I was like, I'm not going to sacrifice all that. I still wanted to talk to people. I still wanted, people would come out and want to join me for a few miles. Some people would just want a book signed or their photo taken at a trailhead. And I felt like that was an important thing to do because I got some inspirational energy from that. But for sleeping, it cut into the point where I was getting 4 to 5 hours pretty regularly. 6 was a good night. Yeah. And then towards the end, the last week and a half, 2 weeks, there were nights where I got 2-3 hours of sleep. And then 1 hour, a lot of nights, basically that last week. Wow. And I was really trying to push the record. Yeah. And again, that was the point where it was either sleep less, spend more time on the trail, or, kiss the record goodbye. And I made a decision. But again, it was just on that edge where any more less sleep, because I would sleep a half hour sometimes on the trail and then get back out there and then, sleep 2 hours in the van or sometimes sleep 2 hours in the tent. So I did spend a lot of time sleeping in shelters and tents and sometimes just a bug net that was put over a sleeping pad. So I did get to experience that, and I love, sleeping out in the woods. And I think a lot of people assume, okay, this runner guy, this ultra runner, he didn't, carry a pack, he didn't sleep under the stars, but there were a lot of nights where I spent in the shelter and in the pouring rain and just experiencing it all. So not to say my experience was better, but it was full of variety and not anything posh. I think I slept 4 nights in a hotel or bed and breakfast the whole time. Yeah, I was on the trail for 46 nights.
So you obviously had a lot of fanfare in the midst of your attempts. How many photos do you estimate taking along the way?
Boy, it's hard for me to guess. On an average day, it was even fun too. The thru-hikers that were out there, it was amazing how many thru-hikers knew what was going on and how word travels along the trail on social media. And, hikers would pop out of their tents or pop out of the shelter in the middle of the night when I'd be, hiking and running at 10 o'clock at night. They'd be coming out, and I would guess on an average day, probably 10 to 15, and some days even more, especially as I got northward and got into Pennsylvania and got into Northern Virginia was pretty busy too, and then getting into up into New York and basically the mid-Atlantic states. And again, it was an amazing experience. I wouldn't have traded it for the world, and I didn't realize how crazy it would get out there. And Jenny would come to trailheads and there'd be 3-4 people already waiting, and I'd come into these road crossings where it was out in the middle of nowhere, and there'd be a couple people waiting to run and hike with me. And so it was a really neat experience. It would have been hard to do self-supported, quite honestly, because as the word traveled, people wanted to kind of experience what that was like. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about you, whether it be you in general or about your hike?
Well, I think, one of the biggest, which we discussed earlier, was really the fact that, can I really enjoy it? And I think it really comes down to the fact this is how I chose to do this experience. And to go for a record, it doesn't mean like every hike or run I'm focused on a record or I'm like trying to go fast. And I think that's the real misconception is that if I'm a runner or say a speed attempt or FKT, I think Jennifer Farr Davis was telling me too, like, she got some flack and gets flack because, could she really enjoy it? Because she was always focused on, going after the record. So I feel like it's just that kind of experience I chose to do. And I love to go out. In fact, especially after that experience, it's like, I love to go out and backpack and do day hikes and runs where I'm not moving as fast. And then there are other times where I really want to challenge myself. So it really kind of comes down to, maybe some people use the old adage of like, hike your own hike or run your own run, but we're all foot travelers. So I feel like there shouldn't be this, this attitude of like, some people are better than others and some people have a better experience than others. There's no speed limit on the trail. We're all out there moving our own bodies. We're not on motorized vehicles. We should be, I guess, encouraging one another. And I guess that's what I really want to get across is my hike and run and through hike experience was for myself. But as it kind of happened, it just organically fed upon itself, and more people were inspired. And I think that's a good thing. The more people we get out, exercising, exploring wild places, and out in the woods and out in the mountains, I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
But some people want their, nobody else around, and you can find that. I think that's the beauty of even the Appalachian Trail, or all the places that we have in this beautiful country, is that you can find that solitude. But also, people go to the wilderness to connect.
Right.
I think that's a message too.
Yeah.
I wanted to get across.
So if we remove summiting Katahdin, is there one particular highlight of your hike?
Oh, it's tough because I had so many amazing ones. I guess one of my favorites was down in the Smokies, even though that was when my injury was starting to develop and get worse. I was just struck by those mountains. I'd always wanted to hike and run in the Smoky Mountains, and it just blew me away, like the beauty as well as the ruggedness and the challenging. That really stands out. And if I were to pick another one, it was probably in Pennsylvania as well as in New York, when I had 30 people running and hiking along with me, and had no idea how these people would start showing up. As much as it was kind of crazy and like hectic, it just added this element to see like how pumped and how excited people were. And I think they're going to take that away and hopefully carry on with their goals that they have and pass it on to others. So it was pretty special, even though like the wilderness experiences of the Smokies or New Hampshire and Maine were pretty incredible. And then bouncing back from my injury too, I'd have to say, like feeling like everything was going to be done after a week on the trail, and then being able to turn things around was pretty special. And of course, finishing and breaking the record, even if it was only by 3 hours. That experience and that feeling was incredible, because I'd gone so to the extreme of like feeling like I couldn't break that record, and then to be able to pull myself out of that, and then have the help of my friends and my wife and everybody who sent me messages. It was really a team effort. It wasn't my experience; it was everyone's.
Yeah. Kind of like the real life Forrest Gump, having hordes of people following you in your running endeavors. Because I'm sure you obviously don't get that in your ultramarathons. It's like the block course.
Yeah, it's a really unique experience, because in a lot of sports or athletes or even professionals, whether they do an art or they do something, you don't invite your like people who are intrigued and following inspirational or fans to like, hey, yeah, come and join me and like hang alongside me. And that was a really unique experience, because they saw the highs and lows. There were days where I'm like, hey, I'm not going to talk much. Right now I'm really struggling. And that was a weird thing for me to manage at times, as well as it was a special experience.
Yeah.
It was tough because, you don't typically say, yeah, come and join me and kind of let them into that world. It was pretty unique. And I think people enjoyed it because of that as well. Mostly.
Did you ever get people that were too invasive or didn't respect your space on the days where you weren't feeling like being entirely social?
I'm pretty easygoing and I'm pretty accepting. I think Jenny had it harder because she was at these road crossings and at trailheads where she had to like get things done, and sometimes she was just trying to get some sleep to catch up on a nap.
Right.
And so for her, I think it was more challenging, because as much as people were excited, they'd be knocking on the door and she'd be trying to get some sleep, or they'd be asking her questions. She'd be like, oh, I've got to get things ready. So, I mean, that was kind of hard. And we had, 60 square feet of space that we lived in, and that was our home. And so sometimes that was hard, where, people were all around and asking questions. And I think that was the hardest thing too, is, people wanted to know all these answers. And sometimes I was like, I've just got to focus and like, tell me about the area, tell me about the natural history and the history of the area. Tell me things. But right now I barely have enough energy to keep moving forward. So
yeah.